nuclear fusion, all the nuclear reactions have already been done. We know how nuclear, we know the cross sections and all that in terms of how kind of colliding nuclei will react and fuse. Uh, when we talk about like applied nuclear fusion from the point of view of energy research, the nuclear reactions, we're not actually studying nuclear reactions. What we're actually studying is the ability of the plasma to confine energy. So we're at, what for nuclear fusion research, the research is actually to do with plasma physics nuclear rather than the nuclear interaction. So you've got this plasma where there's nuclear fusion happening, and the nuclear fusion interactions are producing heat. They're heating the plasma, and then that heat is being transported. Heat flows from hot to cold. So then the heat is flowing out towards the edge of the vessel, and it's being lost. And basically, you know the way you blow a candle out, right? So what's happening? What the process that's happening with a candle is the candle is interacting with oxygen and it's producing heat energy, but the candle only interacts with oxygen above a certain temperature. Like if the temperature is too low, the oxygen doesn't burn. So the question is the heat so you've got, as heat builds up in a system, the temperature of the system increases. So basically, the candle, on the one hand, the candle, when it burns, it's producing heat and it causes the temperature of the candle to rise, but also, although it's producing heat and raising the temperature, heat is being lost to the environment, and that's lowering the temperature. And basically, when you blow out a candle, you're increasing the conductivity of heat away from the candle, and therefore the rate of heat being produced by the candle is not enough to maintain the temperature. Now, if you think of the opposite, another situation of a bonfire, like a large bonfire, quite often when wind blows into a bonfire, it doesn't go out. Mm-hmm. It actually gets lighter because more fuel's going in. And that's because the bonfire is much bigger, so it can just inherently keep energy in for longer. So that yes, when the wind blows into the bonfire, the conductivity of the bonfire, the rate at which it loses heat to the environment, does go up. But the rate at which fuel is being supplied, the oxygen is being supplied to the fuel goes up faster. So that's why a bonfire gets lighter, whereas a candle goes out when you blow it. And this is the underlying analogy of a fusion plasma. That basically, you need to create the magnetic geometry needs to hold the energy in for long enough, so that, because the energy is being lost all the time, there's this balance of energy being produced by the nuclear fusion reaction and then lost to the outside, and you want the rate at which the energy is produced by the fusion reaction to maintain the temperature required to enable fusion to take place, and also to equal the rate at which it's lost to the environment. So fusion research is mostly about the conductivity of magnetized plasma to heat.
Super exciting. Yeah. Okay, so you've graduated with your PhD from that theme. What happened next?
Then I kind of lost my job and wrote philosophy, and then after that I wrote this thing called the philosophical method, which was trying to come up with an objective understanding of morality, like what's right and what's wrong, putting ethics on an objective basis. I think I synthesized utilitarianism and human rights quite well there. And then also I wanted to create, once you have an objective understanding of ethics, you then use that as a foundation to build an objective understanding of politics and economics, like monetary policy, and also I talk a lot about human rights. Politics is really, in my view, politics is really about the right to fight. Like when is it acceptable to fight, and when do you just say, okay, I've got to give in here? I've got to go with the flow. So kind of trying to define human rights, trying to define political legitimacy. When is it like a state? When is the authority of the state legitimate, and when it's not legitimate? That kind of stuff. So that's what I wrote in the philosophical method, and you know, I was sort of going around the place trying to shill my book to people, and you know, I sort of go to friends, and I got a few friends to read it, like maybe maybe 10 to 30 people read the book. It didn't really get a big reading. It's quite wordy. I sort of I went for like rigor rather than engagement. I didn't sort of I really wanted to just get all the details right, and because of that, it's quite wordy. But because I just want to get the logic, I just wanted to get the logic very correct, rather than just rather than writing something that's necessarily engaging. But a few people, but I think a few people liked it because it does cover a lot of things that are interesting, like you know, what's right and what's wrong. How should political systems be governed? How should we How should we deal with monetary policy? What are people entitled to? Universal basic income, that kind of thing. Um, and uh, and then I wrote a few other things. I wrote a very I only the only other thing I kind of published in book form was the Countryside Living Allowance, because I basically found it difficult to get people to read the philosophical method because it's quite big and also quite dense. So I decided, like, okay, like if people don't read it, if people don't implement it, then what good is it going to do? So I decided to try and create this sort of killer policy, this like one little policy that I could summarize in a booklet that would be transformative and massively reduce poverty and all that kind of stuff. And that was the Countryside Living Allowance, because I was really into universal basic income, but the big problem with universal basic income is people do all these universal basic income pilots, and they have these really good results, and like you know more people go into education, the health in localities improves a lot. Often more people start their own businesses, wages go up, all these kind of things, really good things from universal basic income pilots. But then of course the politicians like, oh, that's great, these pilots are having great effects on society. How much is it going to cost again? And then you just, oh, well, maybe we should do something else, because it's just universal basic income is just so expensive. It just costs so much. So the idea of the Countryside Living Allowance was this idea of Henry George's law of wages, that where he said, like, what determines the wage that people will pay? And he says what will determine the wage that people will pay is the amount of the benefit that they can get for themselves by applying their own work to benefit themselves. So I can either, apply my work for my own benefit, like I can either sort of grow food for myself, repair my own house, and just do things that benefit me, or I can apply work for someone else's benefit, and then they can pay me money, and then I can use that money to get somebody else to do something for me. So basically the opportunity cost, so you only, Henry George's idea is you only will work for someone else to get money if the value of what you can buy with that money is greater than the benefit that you could get for yourself, the value you produce yourself working for yourself. And the idea of universal basic income of the Countryside Living Allowance is that in the countryside, houses are cheaper because land is cheaper. So just so you can actually, on marginal land, you can actually provide more benefit for yourself than in cities where the rent's very high. So the idea is by just paying people to move out to the countryside, people have that option to get the little bit of income from the Countryside Living Allowance, and then instead of working in the city, and actually, so the way supply and demand affects price, that the greater the demand, the higher the price. the greater the supply, the lower the price. That applies to wages as well. So people think that we don't want unemployment, but actually, in some ways, unemployment supports supports the price of labor. So if you have too much supply in the labor market, then the negotiating power of workers is very low. So you end up with people absolutely working their ass off and getting paid very, very little. Whereas if less people are in the labor market, then the price of labor is higher and people get higher wages. So that's actually potentially a good thing. Although if wages get too high, then nobody can run a business. And I think the countryside living allowance, the idea of the countryside living allowance is you actually maintain this kind of equilibrium where there's a certain benefit that people can get from just having a homestead in the countryside, maybe building their own house, growing their own food, that kind of stuff, and they get this living allowance that allows them to do that. And then if that's an option, then if that option is better than what they can buy with their wages working in the city, then they'll just leave for the countryside. And if that option is worse, they'll go into the city instead. So then you have this kind of equilibrium where there's this wage that defines what people can get in the countryside. And then if the wages rise above that, then you get this immediate reservoir of labor that comes in to stop the wages getting too high. And if wages fall below that, then you get this outflow of labor that stops the wages getting too low. So you maintain wage stability, and you also maintain livelihood stability, that sort of people's quality of life remains quite stable as well. And also the whole notion of unemployment doesn't become a bad thing, because when you're homesteading for yourself, that's not really demeaning in the same way that sort of sitting around in a flat playing video games is. That if you're actually if you're spending your spare time sort of growing food and repairing the house and maybe even doing art, or making clothes, homesteading, that's a much more sort of a productive way of living, and but it's self-productive, and because it's self-productive, it doesn't lower wages. So you get this nice equilibrium of wages where people always get enough wages to live. So that was the countryside living allowance as a policy, and I made this into a nice little booklet, and most of the people I gave it to read it. It's something that you can it's something that you can just read without spending a week or a month at it,
Yeah.
Then I started a blog called Philosophy for the Future to try and sell these books. And then the blog got a few. I think that it hasn't been spectacularly successful, but it hasn't been a complete failure either. I think I've got about maybe 20,000 page views since it was founded. It's not commercial, but the message has got out to quite a few people, I think. And then then COVID hit, and then I went onto a farm with a fellow I know wanted to start a farming community, and also I thought about a private version of the countryside living allowance where you kind of where I was doing I was thinking about a basic income pilot, where a really thorough basic income pilot where you like do this pilot and then you like measure all these things, these effects of the community. And one of the things I was thinking about measuring was land prices. And I thought, if there's one piece of land where if you live, you get paid basic income, and there's another piece of land where if you live, you don't get paid basic income, then the place where you get paid basic income will probably be, people will want to live there more. So they'll be willing to pay more for the land. So I thought basic income will increase land value prices. So then I thought, if it increases the value of land, maybe it's actually possible for to have a private business model where you actually pay people basic income to raise the value of land. And then I came up with this Sociabuild idea to do that, right? And also I had this idea of house tokens. So so you charge rent and house tokens, and the fact that you can pay your rent and house tokens means that people want house tokens. Like if you can pay your rent with something, then that thing has value. So I went for I had the idea of house tokens, and being able to pay your rent with house tokens. But then the idea is, instead of the landlord collecting the rent, the landlord takes all the rent and pays it back to the people as universal basic income, but it's a house token basic income that the company actually issues. And then the thing is, if you are in control of printing money, then you don't need to make money. So the company can issue as much house tokens as it wants. In practice, it just collects the rent and house tokens and reissues most of it as kind of a house token basic income. But in principle, it can issue as much house tokens as it likes. So you can actually generate profit by simply issuing new house tokens into the system, and then people will pay money for them because they can pay their rent with them. And that was my idea. And I'm starting to, and I gradually started thinking about private business models. Like originally I was kind of a much more mixed economy guy, kind of like socialism, mixed economy, not complete socialism, but I don't know, like Norway, whatever, mixed economy. But the more I thought about the fact that sort of basic income, I came to the conclusion that if a real estate company, if you combine private property with monetary sovereignty, then actually a private system that is good for society might be market competitive. And that's when I started to entertain the possibility of anarcho-capitalism. I think poverty is important. And I don't think you can just ignore poverty. I don't believe in the sort of survival of the fittest and just letting people die. So I was always questioning whether anarcho-capitalism really could handle issues like poverty. And I'm starting to think that maybe if you combine monetary sovereignty with private property, with kind of a suitable contractual arrangement, I actually think that the idea of like property contracts and not harming people could actually, you could almost simulate any form of governance in an anarcho-capitalist system. Like, so you have this anarcho-capitalist superstructure. You know the way if you the way you can have a Unix computer and then run a virtual Windows system on a Unix computer, or you can run a virtual Unix system on a Windows computer. Mm-hmm. I'm starting to think of like anarcho-capitalism as potentially like a Turing machine, where just by you buy property in an anarcho-capitalist system, and then you write this contractual arrangement, and then the property actually almost becomes a virtual state, provided the different property owners can issue their own currency. So that's something I kind of started thinking about, and then I moved to a farm in Norfolk and grew onions and made apple cider and apple juice and grew other vegetables and fermented turnips and things like that. Picked eggs from chickens, harvested eggs from chickens for about 2 years. Mm-hmm. Then I contacted Stefan Tool, and who was like the former CEO of Ethereum for a while, and he kind of actually initially introduced me to the network state idea. I'd been into seasteading for a long time before then. I've been following seasteading at least since 2007. Wow. Then I started thinking about ways to combine network state with sort of intentional communities and prepping and that kind of thing, and I'm sure you can see in the network polity quite a lot of that is in there.
Yes. And you've been active in the chats, in the network state chats by Daniel. You've been reading your posts, have always been a wealth of information. What inspires you to share openly, to share your knowledge in an open source way?
I don't know. I've always been a bit of a shit poster. I've often had this tendency to kind of to sort of get really deep into internet groups. Yeah. It's like before social media. In fact, I'm very late to social media. I think the first time I had no social media accounts until was it 2017, something like that. that was, and the sole reason I did that was because I read this book called by Joanna Penn called How to Market a Book, and then she suggested that social media was a good idea. You have this like website and social media marketing, and that's why I started the Twitter account to just market my book. That was my goal. But long before then, I was sort of I got sort of immersed in various forums. There was a forum I was on called Europe United, which was to create sort of a united European political party at one point. That was when I was quite young. I was like, that would have been again sort of 2006, 2007. I got really kind of deep into that. Like I wrote about, I don't know, about some of the platform. I wrote sort of a lot of the platform of the party. I didn't really go very far, but then there was this Polywell forum, which was this guy called Robert Bussard had this fusion idea that a whole load of people thought was this panacea to nuclear fusion. It would make nuclear fusion much cheaper. It didn't in the end. It had all sorts of problems, but I spent hours and hours on that forum just like writing and that kind of stuff. And then there was the oil drum. I used to be a really frequent reader of the oil drum, and I put a few comments there, but mostly with the oil drum, you just like read the articles. I often participate in the comments somewhat, but not in the same way that I did in Europe. I had other Polywell forum.
What was it about, the oil drum?
Oil drum, that was about peak oil, where they were sort of talking about oil running out and all these like geology reports and things like that.
Okay. Wow. I see.
And critiques of renewable energy, saying that renewable energy wouldn't. I mean, personally, I think renewable energy has a chance, but I'm always interested in people criticizing it as well, because I mean, I think renewable energy could just work. It seems to be doing quite well in Europe. Like I think energy prices in Europe are quite high, but at the same time, things seem to be ticking along, and renewables seem to have penetrated Europe quite a lot. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but I sort of, I like to hear both sides of the story, that kind of thing.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the network polity. Why did you write this? Who helped you? What voices shaped it? I mean, I saw it in the end of the book, but I wanted you to voice it out. And what's your plans with it?
I mean, I guess really what it comes down to is I was very shocked in 2021. Well, in 2020, 2021, I was very shocked about the vaccine, to be perfectly honest. The lockdowns were, I actually kind of was